He drugged her drink, pretended to be unconscious. She heard his plan. Charlie had been with Mason for a couple of years, and she thought she knew him better than anyone. He was charming, brave, and wore the title of firefighter like a badge that made everyone admire him. That night at a friend's party, though, something felt different. Mason kept glancing at her, too often, too carefully, like he was waiting for something to happen. Charlie picked up her glass without thinking much about it. The music was loud, people laughing, conversations spilling into one another. She took a sip, then another. The taste was fine, but within minutes, a heavy fog rolled over her. Her legs weakened, her stomach twisted, and she felt her heart thudding out of rhythm. She tried to tell herself it was just the alcohol. Maybe she hadn't eaten enough. But the truth pressed against her ribs. Something was wrong. The laughter around her blurred into background noise. She steadied herself on the edge of the couch and tried to focus, tried to keep her eyes open. Mason stepped away, excusing himself like he was tired. When she followed him with her eyes, she saw him stretch out on a sofa in the next room. He lay there so still it almost looked like he had passed out. But Charlie caught the smallest twitch of his hand, the way his breathing shifted. He was acting. Her body wanted to give in to the heaviness, to sink into unconsciousness, but she forced herself upright. She stumbled toward the hallway, needing fresh air, anything to clear her head. That's when she heard voices. Colton, Mason's best friend, spoke low but urgent. "You sure she's buying it?" Mason's voice followed, calm and almost smug. "She's halfway gone already. In a few weeks, no one's going to believe her. They'll think she's unstable, maybe even dangerous. I'll have everything in my name." Charlie's hand tightened on the wall. She struggled to breathe, afraid the sound might give her away. Colton hesitated. "And Tessa? What about her?" A pause. Then Mason's voice softened into something cruelly intimate. "She's worth it. Once Charlie's out of the picture, Tessa and I can finally do what we want. She wants this as much as I do." The words stabbed sharper than any knife. Her cousin, her own blood. Charlie felt her knees buckle under the weight of it, but she clung to the wall, holding herself upright, forcing her brain to stay awake, to record every word. "You think she'll go quietly?" Colton asked. "She won't have a choice," Mason said. "Once everyone thinks she's lost it, she'll be alone. And when she's alone, she's powerless." The dizziness pressed harder, dragging her down. Charlie shut her eyes tight, fighting to stay conscious. She knew if she collapsed now, she might never wake up in a way that anyone believed her side of the story. In the haze, one thing became clear. Her life as she knew it was over, and Mason had made sure of it. Charlie sat at the dinner table with her fork resting in her hand, but she couldn't bring herself to take a bite. The food on her plate smelled good, roasted chicken and garlic bread, but her stomach turned every time she tried to eat. Mason sat across from her, chewing slowly, watching her in that calm way that felt like a warning. Tessa sat beside him, laughing at something he said, her arm brushing his like it wasn't strange at all to be so close. The clinking of silverware was the only sound for a while. Mason finally broke the silence, his voice smooth, almost playful. "You should be careful next time, Charlie. You really went overboard last night." Her grip on the fork tightened. "I didn't," she said quietly, almost to herself. He tilted his head, smirking like he was talking to a child. "You don't remember? You were slurring your words, couldn't even stand straight. Tessa, and I had to make sure you didn't hurt yourself." Tessa giggled softly, covering her mouth with her hand. "You were out of it. I thought you were going to topple right over the coffee table." Charlie's stomach twisted. She hadn't been drunk. She knew it. But the two of them sat there, speaking so casually, like they were writing the story of her night for her. She forced herself to take a bite, chewing without tasting, just to keep from saying anything. Mason leaned back in his chair, sipping his drink. "You scared me, passing out like that. You've got to know your limits." His eyes lingered on her, steady, unblinking. Charlie stabbed at the food on her plate, keeping her gaze down. Every word he said pulled her further into the trap. He wanted her to question herself, to wonder if maybe she did drink too much. But deep inside, she could still hear his voice from the night before, whispering his plan to Colton. That wasn't a dream. Tessa nudged Mason's arm, smiling wide. "At least you were there to handle it. Always the hero." Mason grinned at her, a grin that cut into Charlie like glass. She swallowed hard, pressing her fork against the edge of the plate to keep her hands from shaking. Her cousin's laugh rang through the room, light and cruel at the same time. "Honestly, Charlie, it was kind of funny. You should have seen yourself." Charlie finally looked up, meeting Tessa's eyes. There was no warmth there, no shame. Just amusement. She forced herself to smile back, but her jaw ached from holding it in place. The rest of dinner dragged on in slow motion. Mason and Tessa filled the air with their small talk, their inside jokes, their little touches. Charlie sat in silence, her thoughts a storm she couldn't show on her face. When Mason finally set his fork down and leaned back, satisfied, he gave her one last look. "Just promise me you'll be more careful. I don't want people thinking you can't handle yourself." Charlie nodded slowly, her heart pounding in her chest. She knew exactly what he was doing. He wasn't worried about her. He was planting seeds, making her look unstable before anyone else could see the truth. The changes began so small that anyone else might not have noticed, but Charlie felt every single one of them. One afternoon, she tried to log into their joint bank account to pay a bill, only to find the password no longer worked. When she asked Mason about it, he laughed and said he must have changed it by accident. Days later, when she tried again, the same thing happened. Each time she brought it up, Mason brushed it off, claiming she must have forgotten the new code. At first, she doubted herself. Maybe she really had mixed it up. But then she found unopened letters from the bank hidden at the bottom of a drawer in his office. He was keeping information from her. Outside the house, things grew worse. When they went out with friends, Mason joked about her forgetfulness, about how she couldn't keep track of her own keys or remember simple things. He said it with a laugh, but his eyes never left hers, like he wanted to see how much she could take. Their friends laughed along, thinking it was harmless, and Charlie forced a smile to keep from looking defensive. Inside, her chest burned with anger. Tessa started showing up more often, always with some excuse. She would pop in after class, claiming she just wanted to borrow a book or drop off a coffee. Sometimes Mason acted surprised to see her, but other times it felt rehearsed, like he had expected her. She stayed too long, sitting at the kitchen counter, asking Charlie-pointed questions that felt like traps. "You look tired, are you okay? You've been kind of quiet, everything all right?" Her voice carried fake concern, but her eyes sparkled with something cruel. It wasn't just Tessa. Colton, who had always been friendly toward Charlie, began avoiding her altogether. He barely met her eyes when they crossed paths, and his conversations were short and awkward. If she asked him a direct question, he fumbled his words and excused himself quickly. It was clear he was hiding something, but he didn't have the courage to admit it. One evening, while sorting through her things in the bathroom, Charlie noticed her pill bottles out of place. She lined them up every day, always in the same order, but now 2 of them were turned backward. She picked one up and shook it, frowning. The count was off. Pills were missing. She checked another bottle, same thing. Her heart pounded as the realization hit. Mason wasn't just lying to her friends, he was planting evidence. He wanted it to look like she was abusing medication. Her skin prickled with fear. If he told anyone she was struggling, the half-empty bottles would back him up. Charlie sat on the edge of the tub, her hands gripping the bottles tight. The room felt smaller, the air heavier. She couldn't prove it yet, but every part of her knew what he was doing. He was turning her life into a story only he controlled, piece by piece, until she doubted her own reflection. Charlie had learned to move quietly in her own home. Mason was careful, but not careful enough. One night, after he fell asleep on the couch with his phone lying beside him, she picked it up with trembling hand. Her chest felt tight, her ears buzzed, but she unlocked it quickly before her courage slipped away. Her eyes froze on the screen. There were messages from Tessa, more than she could count. At first, it was small, sweet words, flirty jokes. But then it became bold. Tessa wrote things no cousin should ever say about Mason, and Mason's replies were just as intimate. Heat rushed through Charlie's face as she read the words. The affection, the teasing, the late-night confessions, it was all there. Her breath caught when she scrolled further. The messages shifted from romantic to practical. They weren't just sneaking around. They were planning. Mason wrote about selling the house, about finding a way to get Charlie's name off the paperwork. Tessa suggested telling people Charlie was unstable, so no one would question it. Mason agreed. Together, they plotted as if Charlie was just an obstacle, not a person. Charlie set the phone down for a moment, pressing her palms to her eyes. The betrayal cut deeper than anything she had ever felt. This wasn't just cheating. This was erasing her life, her home, her dignity. She put the phone back exactly where it had been, then walked to the bathroom, locking the door behind her. Her whole body shook, but she pulled out her own phone and opened a hidden folder. From now on, every piece of evidence would be saved. She had no idea how long she would need to endure, but she knew she had to keep proof. The next day, while folding laundry, she overheard Mason and Tessa talking in the kitchen. Their voices carried through the thin walls. "She believes everything," Tessa said with a laugh. "It's too easy. She really thinks she's just tired all the time." Mason chuckled. "She's weak. Always has been. People will side with me, not her." Charlie's throat closed. She stayed perfectly still, her hands gripping a shirt so tightly that the fabric wrinkled under her fingers. Their laughter echoed, each word a knife. They weren't even trying to hide it anymore. From that day, she became careful. She slipped her phone into her pocket whenever she passed through the kitchen, recording bits of conversation when she could. She took photos of anything suspicious: empty pill bottles, hidden bank letters, the way Tessa's shoes appeared at the door more often than her own. At night, when Mason's phone was left charging, she snapped quick pictures of the texts and sent them to herself, hiding them in encrypted folders. Every detail mattered. Every receipt, every slip of paper, every message, she saved them all. Charlie moved through the house with a quiet mask, never letting them see what she knew. But inside, the storm grew stronger. Mason thought she was weak. Tessa thought she was pathetic. They had no idea she was building the record of their downfall, piece by piece. The silence in the house had a weight to it, like walls listening for mistakes. Smiles were practiced, voices soft, movements careful. Nothing could reveal what she really knew. Every glance at her was returned with a weak laugh. Every cruel remark met with a shrug. It wasn't weakness. It was a mask she wore to keep suspicion away. At the dinner table, a fork slipped from her hand and clattered loudly against the plate. She let out a shaky laugh. "Guess I'm clumsy tonight." Mason leaned back with a smile that was too smooth, reaching across to brush her hand. "You've been like that a lot lately," he said, with false worry dripping from his tone. Across from him, Tessa hid a grin behind her glass. They believed it. They believed she was unraveling. Each day became a performance. Forgetting things on purpose, pretending to be lost in thought, fumbling with her phone as if she couldn't remember what she was looking for. Mason's chest puffed up with quiet pride at every stage stumble. Every moment she appeared confused. Tessa's confidence grew too, her presence in the house more bold, her voice lighter. They thought the plan was working, that she was drifting exactly where they wanted. Behind closed doors, everything was different. A phone call to a lawyer confirmed what they hadn't considered. The house wasn't his alone. Papers they thought meaningless gave her more protection than Mason could twist away. As long as her name was signed, he couldn't simply erase her. The discovery steadied her shaking hands, put air back in her lungs. She wasn't as trapped as they believed. Nights were the best time to work. While Mason snored on the couch or in bed, files were lifted from drawers, bank statements copied, and emails forwarded to a hidden account only she could reach. Careful steps, quick glances over her shoulder, then papers returned to their places exactly as before. No trace left behind. The hardest part wasn't the sneaking. It was the acting. When Mason leaned in close, whispering sharp little digs designed to break her down, she kept her eyes low and nodded like she agreed. "You wouldn't last a week without me," he murmured once, his hand squeezing her shoulder a little too hard. She only let her lips tremble in silence, though inside she carved the words into memory. Tessa left trails too. Lipstick on the sink, a scarf on the sofa, a jacket on the chair. Each one a taunt, a signal that she no longer cared about hiding. They wanted her to see, to feel small. Instead, each careless clue became another piece in the puzzle, proof of their arrogance. Carefully, she collected every detail, storing it away where neither of them could touch. What they saw was someone unraveling, someone losing her grip. What they didn't see was the quiet hand stacking evidence, building a case they would never expect. They thought she was confused. They thought she was blind. But in the shadows, she was shaping the ending to their story. Mason accused her of being crazy in front of their friends one evening when they were all gathered around a table at a busy restaurant. The group was laughing, telling stories, passing plates of food, when he leaned back with his arms stretched casually over his chair. With a smirk, he said, "You guys don't know what I deal with. Charlie gets these moods, like she's losing it. Sometimes I swear she's completely crazy." The laughter at the table died down. A few people forced chuckles, but most of them looked away awkward. Charlie's face went hot, her throat tightening as if she had swallowed fire. She pressed her lips together and lowered her gaze to her plate, trying to mask the sting. Mason sipped his drink like nothing was wrong, enjoying the control, while everyone else slowly picked the conversation back up. No one defended her. No one asked if it was true. In that moment, the room tilted, and she realized he was winning the story he wanted people to believe. It didn't stop there. At family gatherings, Mason kept close to Tessa. She would laugh too loud at his jokes, touch his arm when she spoke, lean toward him with a glow in her eye. Her hand brushed his sleeve at the dinner table, her body angled toward his, as though they belonged together. Charlie sat across from them, watching her cousin flaunt what was supposed to be hers, the humiliation spreading through her like poison. Family members noticed but stayed silent, whispering to each other when they thought she couldn't see. The air at those gatherings turned heavy, thick with pity that made her want to disappear. She said nothing. She let the shame burn quietly in her chest and kept her mouth shut. Each cruel jab Mason made, every smug smile from Tessa, became another stone in the pile she carried. But behind her silence was resolve. She was letting them dig their own grave, brick by brick, word by word. Then came the accident Mason never realized he made. Late one evening, he stepped out onto the porch to take a call. When he came back inside, he tossed his phone onto the couch before heading to the kitchen for a drink. The screen lit up with a notification, his voicemail app still open. Charlie's heart thudded in her chest as she stared at it. She reached for the phone, her fingers trembling. She pressed play. Mason's voice spilled out, careless and proud. Yeah, I drugged her drink that night, he told Colton. She didn't even notice. She was out before she knew what hit her. It's perfect. Everyone will think she's unstable, and then I can move forward without her in the way. Charlie froze, the words searing themselves into her brain. Her hand shook so badly she almost dropped the phone, but she pressed the buttons quickly, saving the message and forwarding it to her own hidden folder. By the time Mason walked back into the room, glass in hand, the phone was back on the couch, and Charlie sat still as stone, her expression blank. He smiled at her like a man who thought he had won. He didn't know he had just given her the proof that would ruin him. The idea of a weekend away came to her one morning when Mason was bragging on the phone about how stressed he was. She walked into the room with a small smile and said softly, "Maybe we should all get away for a couple of days. Just us, no distractions. Maybe it could help us reset." Mason looked surprised at first. Then his mouth curved into that satisfied grin she had come to hate. He liked the idea, probably because he thought it meant she was desperate to hold on to him. She suggested inviting Tessa and Colton, making it sound like a friendly gathering instead of a couple's retreat. Mason agreed easily, and Tessa acted thrilled at the thought. Colton hesitated but eventually said yes, his eyes shifting away as though he already knew something bad was brewing. When the plan was set, Charlie worked in silence. The cabin they rented was quiet and private, tucked away by a lake with trees wrapping it like a wall. While Mason carried bags inside, she unpacked slowly, slipping small cameras into corners, tucking tiny audio recorders into lamps and behind picture frame. Each movement was careful, each placement chosen to catch the words and faces that would betray them. In the kitchen, she set bottles on the counter, smiling when Mason walked by and asked if she was planning to play bartender. "Just thought we could make it fun," she said, her voice light. He nodded and left her to it. As soon as he was gone, she pulled out the small packet she had hidden in her bag. The herbal supplements looked like powder, harmless but bitter when mixed into drinks. Nothing dangerous, nothing that could hurt anyone, but strong enough to leave a strange aftertaste that lingered on the tongue. She stirred it carefully into 2 glasses, the ones she knew Mason and Tessa would pick up first. When everyone settled in that evening, the air in the cabin seemed cheerful on the surface. Mason joked about the long drive, Tessa teased him, and Colton tried to keep the mood light. Charlie laughed at the right moments, pouring drinks and passing them out like a perfect hostess. Her hands stayed steady even as her heart raced. The first sips brought the reaction she expected. Tessa wrinkled her nose. "This tastes weird," she muttered, glancing at Mason. He took a sip of his own and frowned. "Yeah, something's off." Charlie widened her eyes, feigning confusion. "Really? Mine tastes fine." She lifted her glass and drank, smiling as if nothing was wrong. The unease grew slowly. Mason looked into his glass, swirling it as though something hidden might float to the surface. Tessa whispered to him, her face tight with suspicion. Colton, noticing the tension, tried to joke, but neither of them laughed. Charlie kept her expression calm, her eyes innocent. Inside, though, she felt the first spark of control she hadn't had in months. The stage was set, the walls had ears, and Mason and Tessa were finally stepping into the trap she had built for them. The cabin felt heavy with tension the second night. Mason and Tessa sat too close on the couch, whispering, trading looks that burned with irritation instead of charm. The drinks had loosened their tongues, and the bitterness of what Charlie slipped into them seemed to gnaw at their nerves. It started with a sharp laugh from Tessa. "You think you're so smooth, don't you? Like no one sees how you treat her." Her voice was low but cutting. Mason's jaw tightened. "Don't start this now," he muttered. Charlie sat in the chair across from them, quiet, hands folded in her lap. She leaned back, pretending to be weary, while inside her chest thudded with a steady rhythm. The moment had arrived. She slipped her phone into her palm, pressed a button, and the sound of Mason's own voice filled the room. "Yeah, I drugged her drink that night. She didn't even notice. It's perfect. Everyone will think she's unstable." The words poured out of the tiny speaker like poison. Tessa froze, her mouth falling open. Mason shot to his feet, his face drained of color. "What the hell is that?" he snapped, eyes darting to Charlie. She looked back at him with calm eyes. "Your words," she said softly. The room cracked open after that. Mason turned to Tessa, anger flaring. "You told her, didn't you? You couldn't keep your mouth shut." Tessa shot up from the couch, shaking her head wildly. "Don't you dare put this on me. You're the one who left your phone lying around." Their argument spiraled, voices rising, faces flushed. In their panic, the truths they had hidden for months spilled out. Tessa's hands flew as she spoke. "We were supposed to be rid of her by now. You promised. You said she'd look crazy, and no one would believe her." Mason growled back, pointing a finger in her face. "And you were the one who kept pushing, telling me we could sell the house, that we didn't need her. You wanted this just as much as I did." The words fell sharp into the room, each confession layering over the last. Charlie's phone recorded it all, tucked safely on the side table, the red light blinking faintly in the dim glow of the lamp. Colton, who had been sitting silently in the corner, finally stood. His face was pale, his hands trembling. "Enough," he said, his voice rough. Mason and Tessa turned toward him, but he kept his eyes on Charlie. "It's true," he whispered. "He bragged about it to me. He said he drugged your drink. He laughed about it like it was a game." The silence after his words was deafening. Mason's mouth opened and closed, but no excuse came out. Tessa stared at him like she was seeing him for the first time. Charlie didn't flinch. She only nodded, her face calm, though her heart beat like a drum inside her chest. Every word, every confession was captured. The mask Mason had worn for so long was gone, ripped apart by his own arrogance. Back in town, the quiet of her own home felt different. It wasn't the cage Mason had tried to make it. It was hers, solid and steady under her feet. The recordings, the messages, the files she had gathered were no longer secrets tucked away. She carried them straight to her lawyer, laying everything out piece by piece. He listened without interrupting, his brow furrowing deeper with each detail. When she finished, he nodded slowly. "This is more than enough," he said. "You've built a wall of proof they can't climb over." The next days moved quickly. Papers were filed, calls were made, and soon Mason's name began to crumble in places he never expected. At the firehouse, whispers turned into questions. The voicemail spread among his co-workers, the details of what he had done too ugly to ignore. His captain called him in, and by the end of the week, his badge and uniform were stripped from him. Mason Holt, the man who once walked proudly in flames, was left standing in the ashes of his own lie. For Tessa, the fall came in a different way. When her parents learned what she had done, the house grew cold toward her. Her mother couldn't look her in the eye. Her father's voice shook with rage when he told her to leave. "You betrayed your own blood," he said, slamming the door behind her. Relatives turned their backs. Friends stopped answering her calls. The cousin she mocked had taken away not just her scheme, but the family she thought would always forgive her. Charlie's world, once full of doubt and gaslight, shifted into steady ground. The lawyer secured her hold on the house. Mason's name was erased from every corner of it, the papers signed clean and final. Restraining orders followed, thick with warnings Mason and Tessa could not cross. No more uninvited visits, no more whispered threats, no more games played in her kitchen or her bedroom. The walls were hers again, safe and untouchable. Mason tried to fight back at first. He sent messages, tried calling from different numbers, even showed up outside places he thought she might be. But each time, the law stood firm between them, pushing him further away. Jobs wouldn't hire him once the truth spread. His money drained faster than he could replace it. The man who once boasted about control now sat in the shadow of bills he couldn't pay and doors that wouldn't open. Charlie didn't gloat. She didn't send him words of triumph or chase Tessa down for apologies that would mean nothing. She simply lived, breathing easier in the silence of a house that belonged only to her. Mason's ruin and Tessa's exile weren't victories she celebrated with fireworks. They were the natural end to the poison they had poured into her. The revenge wasn't loud. It was quiet, steady, and final. Mason and Tessa had set out to strip her of everything. Instead, they lost it all, and she stood stronger in the space they thought they could erase her from. The days after it all ended felt strange at first. The house was quiet, not in the way it used to be when tension filled every corner, but in a clean, open way. There were no footsteps behind her, no whispers in the next room, no sudden jabs meant to make her doubt herself. Just silence, her silence, and it felt like breathing fresh air after years underground. The betrayal had cut deep. It wasn't just Mason and his lies, but Tessa too. Blood turned against her for greed. That wound would never fully heal, but she learned not all scars need hiding. They reminded her of the patience she carried, the strength she built piece by piece while pretending to stumble. For so long she let them think they were winning, and that quiet endurance had been the sharpest weapon of all. Revenge hadn't come in a dramatic explosion. It came in the slow crumble of the life Mason thought he controlled. Every lie he spoke turned into a stone dragging him down. Every cruel smirk Tessa flashed at family dinners ended in the silence of her parents' house shutting her out. Charlie hadn't needed to shout or fight, just to wait and hold steady until their own weight crushed them. For herself, she didn't rush toward anything new. There was no quick escape into another pair of arms, no wild attempt to erase what had been done. She chose quiet mornings, steady work, and the simple act of taking care of her own life without someone twisting it in their hand. Friends reached out. Family gathered around her again, softer now, less pity in their voices and more respect. But even with them, she took her time. Nights became her favorite. She would sit outside on the porch, the air carrying the scent of grass and wood, a glass of wine resting in her hand. She'd listen to the crickets, the wind through the trees, the gentle hum of a world that asked nothing of her. Those moments belonged to no one else, and she guarded them fiercely. Sometimes memories tried to creep back. Mason's face leaning close, whispering that she wouldn't survive without him. Tessa's laugh echoing at the table while everyone watched. The dizziness of that night when her drink turned sour and her world tilted on its side. Those thoughts hurt, but they didn't hold her anymore. They passed like shadows, reminders of where she had been, not where she was going. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the porch in warm gold, she thought back to that night at the party. Mason stretched out on the couch, pretending to be unconscious while planning her destruction in whispers. She swirled the wine in her glass, a quiet smile tugging at her lips. "You should have stayed asleep," she whispered into the fading light. The words weren't bitter, not anymore. They were soft, final, carried away on the breeze. For the first time in years, she wasn't trapped, wasn't waiting, wasn't pretending. She was free. And freedom, she realized, was the only ending she ever needed.